Welcome back to Close Mode. I'm Dan Sanchez, and I'm here with Brian Dietmeyer to talk about a topic that I feel like is not brought up nearly enough when it comes to leading sales organizations. So, Brian, you were just telling me that decision-making is becoming kind of like a secret ingredient or a core competency that sales reps really need to master, but it's very rare that account reps or your sales teams actually have this kind of skill set in their tool belt to be able to make good decisions along the way throughout the sales pipeline. Can you define a little bit for us, like why you think that's becoming a core skill now versus what it was before?
Yeah, sort of the macro market has changed, right? We all know this. There's 6.7 buyers per buy. There's committee buys. So these buys are getting very complex. No decision is on the rise because customers are struggling with this complexity. And so we're in the business, we think we're in the business of buying and selling stuff. If we define this from the customer's perspective, they're in the business of making a decision and making a decision that's going to benefit their organization to the highest possible levels. And they're struggling with that decision. And everyone's pipeline is like the stuff's getting stuck in stages. And so that's why in the old school sense of the word, many of us were taught to understand the customer's decision process. It's not enough anymore. We got to know it better than them, and we got to lead it.
So is that why like things get stalled out and it takes too long? Because essentially we're waiting for the customer, and you're saying you need to lead the customer. You need to help them walk through their own decision making before they even know they need to be there. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, and I'll throw a disclaimer on there. If and we do some of this. I personally sell this way, and if you're going to help a customer make a decision, to a great degree, you have to be objective in that help. You know, we can get into the weeds a little bit in terms of here are the people who should be involved in your organization. Dan, here's the criteria you might be using when you're buying this kind of a solution. But you have to be as objective as possible. And you know, I heard a metaphor or analogy that I really like, that customers are like veterinarians. Like a snake walks in, right? A turtle walks in, a cow walks in, and the vet every day, you know, they're solving for different problems. Well, customers buy that way. They may have bought your stuff one time a year, every 18 months, where you, on the other hand, are not only a neurosurgeon, you're a spinal neurosurgeon on how to buy your stuff. Let's say you're selling firewall protection software. You've seen thousands of customers buy this thing, and you can pull that and you've seen a lot of customers make bad and good decisions. It's pulling that informational knowledge together to provide that insight to the customer to say, look, we've watched a ton of people buy these, and let me walk you through a little bit about how the best have really done it.
It sounds kind of like the challenger sale when you're kind of leading them from a thought leader or expert kind of perspective. How is this different from that?
Yeah, I think I would, yes. And full stop, yes. But I call it more of a prescriptive approach, right? That if you look at Jim Dickey with Sales Mastery, his research showed that his buyer research, buyers rank reps 9 out of 10 places they go for insight. It's very, very dangerous. And that's the bad news. The good news is buyers said if they had something to talk to me about, I would talk to them. I'll gladly let them back in to this thing. So yeah, if you've got one of the biggest problems that impacts us and the customer is these deals are getting stalled. There's a ton of uncertainty in the market. You know, it's not the way it was. Deals are getting more complex and they're stalling. So for us to be able to walk in and say, I have some insight to help you organize and think through this very complex decision that you're trying to make. And again, as unbiased as possible, you're right. It is insight. We are leading the customers. We're bringing in more prescriptive stuff versus if salespeople are still going out saying, hey, Dan, what's your decision process? You're screwed because they don't know. They're terrible at it. And we actually know it better. That's the part. You know, it takes a little mining in your organization to find out, you know, how to make an optimal decision. But you've seen a lot of people buy your stuff in a good and bad way.
Now, I'm a marketer, so I've read mostly marketing books in my career, but I have read a few sales books. And one of my favorite sales books was a book by Mark Roberge, The Sales Acceleration Formula, essentially outlining HubSpot's, the CRM's selling playbook and what he did. And he came in as an engineer into a sales leadership role and kind of just engineered the crap out of it. But one of the things they did that I thought was really genius was taking their sales reps and then actually running them through their inbound marketing university courses, taught them marketing, and then got them spinning up their little side hustles with blog posts and SEO and getting leads and all that kind of stuff. So by the time they're actually on the phones selling to customers, a lot of times, not always, but a lot of times they actually understood marketing better than the people buying the CRM because they had actually been trained on it, had walked through practical processes, actually started ranking for it. And I think it kind of led to that better decision making framework just because they were knowledgeable and then became, of course, knowledgeable at HubSpot because that's what they were using to do their little things. But it kind of reminds me of like leading from expertise, but also using it to understand the buyer's problems
Yes.
and what they need next. Like, oh, they could spin it around and be like, well, tell me about how you're getting traffic. Oh, you're not sure? Oh, yeah, you got to be able to look that up on your analytics. Well, how are you converting leads then? Well, tell me about your lead follow-up process. Okay,
Yeah.
that sounds pretty good, but then your
Yes.
traffic is really the problem. So let me tell you how we can solve that. And essentially, you're trying to troubleshoot their own marketing plan before they even know how to even think about their marketing plan. Is it is that kind of similar to what you're talking about with having a decision making framework because you're able to kind of like pinpoint what their problem is, or am I diving off into a different area here?
So no, you're not. This general idea of what value add can we bring to the buyer? What are they struggling with? Falls across multiple categories. I just happen to think the one that's front and center right now is they are struggling with decisions, which is clogging up our pipeline and just dogging them. Are we there yet? Are we there yet? The kids in the car thing is not going to help. But changing the conversation and thinking of my role as a rep different, that I am here to help you make an optimal decision. So back to your other point, which I really like about the customer problems that we're solving for. If we're helping customers make optimal decisions, we are helping customers make decisions that drive the KPIs across multiple stakeholders. We tend to think of the strategic stakeholders who are setting where we go, the mid-level initiative folks that are putting initiatives in place to execute this strategy, and then the operational technical folks at the bottom who make it all come alive. So customers should be making decisions with the highest probability they're buying something to move some KPIs. So these things kind of come together. Does that make sense? And coming into them and saying, "Hey, Dan, if you're buying this firewall protection software from the CISO, down to a security analyst, here's how you should be thinking about making this decision based on the KPIs of all those people at all those levels." So it's kind of like you're bringing it all together, and there's some soft stuff in there, ease of use and hassle and that kind of thing, but a lot of it should be driven to KPIs. And I think, Dan, the other point you're making is making them aware of stuff that they hadn't thought about. When you're making this decision, this stakeholder should be considering these criteria when comparing these two alternatives. That's an opportunity to lead. We call that signaling, where you're putting those ideas into someone's brain and they hadn't thought about those.
So what I hear you saying is like there's two sides to it. There's you being an expert on their thing, right? So understanding what they're going through, that's one thing, but you have a different expertise as a sales rep. You have the expertise of having gone through this process dozens or hundreds of times versus they have not because they have not
Yes.
been a sales rep for the thing that you're selling. Therefore, you have a whole different skill set that you're bringing to the table in order to help them and guide them. That even if they are experts in what they do and they've done it, maybe in HubSpot's example, they've procured a few CRMs before, different CRMs, different companies, different times and places. But what? It's probably going to be less than five.
Right.
Five would be a lot.
Right. Yep.
You have dozens or hundreds, which means your understanding, and you have it across way more industries, way more examples, big, small, all kinds of questions that have been asked, which arms you with more information than them to be able to expertly guide them through and predict what they're going to need when they're going to need it.
See, to me, that's sort of the killer app, because we know it's distributed a little bit around our organization. But I can think of a company we worked with who sells supply chain solutions, and when you map out how should you be making, let's say GE is buying this supply chain solution, how should GE be making a decision to most impact, right, their business results, whatever it is? Well, there's a finite list of things that an enhanced supply chain solution can bring to GE, right? But you know all of those, and it's probably more than the customer knows, and they should be making decisions, right? We already know this. It's like it's not unlimited what we can do. It's not unlimited the business impact we can have. So let's map that out in the clearest way possible for the customer. And now you're winning. Jim Dickey, who I often quote, said, in today's world, the way you sell might be just as important as what you sell. And so selling in this way to say, hey, Dan, I mean, a typical script would look like this to say, I'm not really here to talk about Close Strong today, but we've seen a lot of people buy our stuff. And I want to share with you some of the best practices we've seen about who's involved in those decisions and what kind of criteria should be used when you analyze me and somebody else side by side, so you can make the most holistic decision for your organization. And then we start going through. That's kind of the pitch and saying, okay, it's these people at these different levels, and then looking at the criteria, the key criteria tied a lot to KPIs, to really valuable discussion.
So you've kind of outlined this in bits and pieces and everything you just said, but kind of break down for me, if there's a sales leader listening to this,
Yeah.
how could they, within even just this week, what items can they take action on in order
Yes.
to help their reps make better decisions over the next quarter?
Yeah, and I would slightly adjust your language to how can we help the reps help customers make better decisions,
Yeah,
right? And
that's right.
so in order to provide the reps like with that content, they need to do this, right? What one is just that tee up, which is pretty easy. It's changing the role. I am here to share with you some best practices we've seen of people buying this kind of solution, not even my solution, but firewall protection or supply chain management solutions. And then the next level is thinking about the stakeholders at those three levels. Again, who's setting the strategy, who usually lives at the initiative level to make the strategy come alive, and who are the ops folks and technical folks. It's then mapping out who are the people. If your customer is making an optimal decision that's going to have the highest impact on their organization, who should be involved? So that's step one, the tee up. Step two is let's say who are the stakeholders at those kind of three levels, and you can have however many levels you want, but we do need to think from strategy to tactics, and then thinking about the criteria, especially in terms of KPIs. So how are those different stakeholders driven? Given what you sell, what of their KPIs can you impact? You're selling firewall protection. What can you do for the techie people down below and the CISO up top? And then putting those criteria in place based on their KPIs. So again, changing the frame. This is what I'm here to do. If these people aren't involved in your decision, they should be. And here's the criteria. When you compare us side by side with someone else, here's the criteria we've seen, which is best practice. When that's going to have the most impact on your organization. That would be the first place to start. Is list out the people, list out the criteria, heavily driven by the KPIs that this kind of solution can impact, and then getting that into a format and having a leave behind for the customer, because this can get a little thick. I wouldn't go more than 4 or 5 criteria per stakeholder, but just to start, bring in the most important ones they should be considering when making this decision,
Yeah.
and then having it in some form of a leave behind to just say, here, I'm going to leave this. You can share it with the team, and maybe the team can begin thinking through, if you've got some quant heavy people in the organization. We've done this in the past. You could build, someone in your organization knows how to build a weighted attribute decision matrix in an Excel spreadsheet. You could throw this into a weighted attribute decision matrix and leave it behind with the customer to say, okay, fill in me versus the alternative, weight and score us on multiple criteria with multiple stakeholders. That, if you want to go to the advanced level, that's pretty easy for somebody who's familiar with manipulating spreadsheets. Pretty damn easy.
Sounds like you could get this done in one 60-minute meeting. It's just one shared. I mean, if it's a remote, if you do this on a whiteboard, otherwise you're doing this on a Google Doc or something
Yeah.
in a Zoom meeting or something,
Yep.
and you just write down who's the three main key stakeholders we talk to all the time, and you
Yep.
put their criteria, the things they're asking about. Most often, you rank stack though. You come up with a big list of them, and then you rank stack them, come up with that, and then you let your people then fill in the answers to those in that
Yeah.
doc, and then bam, you have a great knowledge doc that then you can transfer over to wherever you keep your SOP and your training docs, because that becomes a golden thing. Probably maybe 2 meetings, one to come up with the criteria and rank stack them, the other one to maybe this just happens a synchronously afterwards. They go in and fill it in with the answers to those criteria so that you have it once. But this is a one-time thing, and it can set them up for success in helping them lead those things, because you can always refer back to that document in the buying process of think like, have we gotten these covered for this particular account, and
Yep.
leading them through it and getting the answer to them before they even know they need to ask it.
Yeah.
That's the key.
Yep. And I would, yes. And I would add just a couple filters for developing the criteria. The stakeholder is pretty easy at the kind of high, medium, low level. But with the criteria, it's one is they should be driven by the KPIs of that stakeholder you're talking about, based on what you're selling. What can you impact for that stakeholder? And it's like, who drives, lower risk, us, this supplier A or supplier B. The other piece is, when you go through this, it's kind of a cool exercise to look across the stakeholders and look across the criteria and say, against this specific competitor, that competitor could be do nothing, it could be build it myself, or a named competitor. Where do we have an edge? With what stakeholders do we do this? Do we drive this KPI, better, faster, cheaper than somebody else? That's sort of after the fact, when we start selling to them, right? It's making sure that we're punching the reasons why us at this level of stakeholder and criteria. These aren't grand value statements. This is, hey, we can drive throughput or defect reduction better, Mr. or Ms. Technical Person, better than ABC competitor. That's after the fact. We want to keep this objective up front, but it's a cool part of the exercise is, where would we win if the customer was really making the decision on what criteria do we win?
Wow. I've learned a lot in this episode. Brian, thanks so much for joining me and being on the other side of the interviewee here.
It's always fun with you.